Though Joe Rogan is one of the most recognizable and knowledgeable faces within the sport of mixed martial arts, over the years, he has never been afraid to speak his mind when it comes to the many fighters that make up the UFC's roster. And though his job as a commentator gives him a responsibility to chime in with his takes on everything from the fights themselves to the many personalities within the fight game, he does find himself in hot water from time to time. With that in mind, we're going to take a look at 10 times that Joe Rogan managed to seriously offend some of the world's best MMA athletes. This is 10 times Joe Rogan disrespected UFC fighters. Number 10. Quinton Rampage Jackson. Though Rogan is widely loved by the MMA community, one persistent criticism that has followed him over the years has been his tendency to weave and stubbornly stick to any narratives that he feels are emerging fight by fight. And for Quinton Rampage Jackson, Rogan's coloring of his fights did not sit too well. After taking on the future Bellator champion Ryan Bader, Jackson took to the media to voice his disapproval of Joe's commentary style, telling the veteran fight caller that he was misrepresenting what was actually happening inside the cage.
Commentators should be like neutral, and like a lot of times he does nut ride like jiu-jitsu guys a lot. I see it. And
the pair had a brief public spat that was eventually brought to a halt when they put aside their differences and made up. Even with that being the case though, to this day, Rogan still finds himself under major criticism by both the fans and the fighters for his overly narrative-driven approach to commentating. Number 9. Tyron Woodley. Whether you realize it or not, Rogan has a very strong level of control over how we see the mixed martial arts game and the strengths and weaknesses of its fighters. During Tyron Woodley's divisive reign atop the welterweight division, one of the narratives that consistently followed him around was one concerned with his seemingly poor stamina. Now, of course, Tyron's fighting style was one that was seemingly built around stamina conservation, a slow and methodical pace that was built around keeping him fresh and dangerous in the later rounds. According to the former champ himself, Rogan's constant fixation on his gas tank caused the narrative to be focused around the danger of him running out of energy, rather than his clear ability to conserve it. And it was understandable. During his reign, Woodley maintained a high level of power well into the 5th round, as a direct result of his patient fighting style. And when you stop and think about it, it's easy to see why Woodley was so enraged by Rogan's calling of the fights. Number 8. Khabib Nurmagomedov. The event was UFC 223, a card that featured the showdown for the vacant lightweight title between Khabib Nurmagomedov and his opponent Al Iaquinta. Those of you who remember the sheer madness of that event's fight week will no doubt be aware of how much adversity Khabib had to work through just to get an opponent to share the cage with him on the night itself. And though the fight was a largely one-sided affair, during the event's initial broadcast, it did seem as though Rogan was too eager to praise Iaquinta whenever he did even the slightest thing correctly. Look, we all like a good underdog story, and Ragin' Al fits that billing more than anyone, but to the unbiased eye, that was a very strong and dominant performance from Nurmagomedov. One that saw him win the fight and every single round with it. In the event's aftermath, Rogan posted an apology statement to his official Instagram page, admitting that he sometimes gets too caught up in the moment to fully grasp what is actually happening. It was a fair explanation, all things considered, but that did not stop the devoted fans of the Eagle from giving the commentator a piece of their mind in the days that followed. Number 7. Jose Aldo. To say that Jose Aldo was disrespected hugely in the lead-up to his showdown with Conor McGregor would be the understatement of the century. Between the bombardment of trash talk he was receiving from the Irishman himself and the ridicule he suffered at the hands of the fans both before and after, this legendary featherweight champion had every reason to consider this milestone in his career a highly toxic affair from start to finish. And to make matters worse, Joe Rogan, while on the commentary desk during the official walkouts, seemed to indicate off-mic that he was suspicious of how Aldo's body looked, speaking to someone beside the desk when he believed his mic had been muted. The insinuation over steroid use was clear as day.
45 pounds.
Yeah, he looks good, huh, Joe?
No, he looks soft.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he looks soft.
Yeah, around the middle, you're saying?
Yeah. He looks deflated.
The problem was that the faint audio of the conversation was picked up by the broadcast, leaving Rogan with some explaining to do. In the time that followed, he issued an apology, obviously embarrassed that his private thoughts had been made public, but all in all, the damage had already been done. Number 6. Leonard Garcia. Leonard Garcia is without question one of the wildest fighters in the history of mixed martial arts. A true warrior in every sense of the word. Garcia has been involved in some of the greatest wars we've ever had the pleasure of witnessing. However, Joe Rogan seemingly wasn't Garcia's biggest fan, criticizing Leonard's fighting style and the eventual scorecards that saw him steal away a victory from his UFC 136 opponent, Nam Phan. Calling Garcia's approach throwing rocks, Rogan managed to seriously anger the hard-nosed veteran, something that led him to question his integrity as a member of the promotion's commentary team. In truth, Garcia's wild offense has caused him to win a number of fights that he perhaps should have lost, due to the judges focusing on his huge volume of strikes, no matter how many of them are actually landing. Number 5. Daniel Cormier. Now, before you say anything, yes, we are aware that Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier are good friends and have an excellent level of chemistry in the commentary booth. But during the UFC 214 main event, it cannot be said that Rogan didn't make a serious error in judgment. Cormier had just suffered a brutal defeat in the biggest fight of his career to date, a grudge match with his great rival Jon Jones, and though he was clearly distraught and potentially concussed, Rogan still made the decision to conduct a post-fight interview. The resulting conversation was seriously difficult to watch, as the former Olympian sobbed his way through an interview that led to him widely being ridiculed in the time that followed. All in all, Rogan made a bad call, and though he later apologized directly to DC, that low point in the legendary wrestler's career could never be erased from history. Number 4. Alistair Overeem. On the subject of post-fight interviews that never should have happened, when Alistair Overeem fought Stipe Miocic for the heavyweight title at UFC 203, the resulting knockdown should have seen him left alone when the time came to speak to the general public. However, Joe Rogan decided that Overeem should get his opportunity to address his fans in the wake of his harrowing first-round defeat. The resulting interview was equal parts awkward and difficult to watch, as Overeem attempted to tell the world that Stipe Miocic had in fact tapped to a guillotine attempt earlier in the fight. Rogan, being Rogan, decided to make an example of Alistair, showing him the replays and asking him to point out the tap in a highly condescending manner. In the end, Joe once again apologized, before promising that he would never again interview a concussed fighter. And all in all, that decision was likely for the best, given that it's completely unfair to the fights in question. Number 3. Maynard. You're not likely to experience a more awkward post-fight interview than the one turned in by Maynard after his no contest against Rob Emerson back in 2007. In what was a shocking turn of events, Maynard had managed to finish Emerson after the Ultimate Fighter veteran tapped due to the force of a hard slam takedown Gray managed to pull off. The problem was that Maynard, in doing so, also rendered himself unconscious, leaving the ref with little choice but to call the fight off. However, what made this such a memorable moment was the fact that Rogan seemed determined to prove to Maynard that he had, in fact, been knocked out. The pair had a brief back and forth before the interview came to a hilariously awkward ending. All in all, Rogan was once again doing a clearly concussed fighter dirty, just to prove a point. Number 2. Brendan Schaub. Once again, we're going to take a look at one of Rogan's close friends, another MMA fighter he managed to seriously disrespect in a very public way. Brendan Schaub was never an elite talent within the UFC's heavyweight division, and after a grueling loss to Travis Brown, he found himself at something of a crossroads in his career. What he didn't need was for Rogan to corner him on his podcast and attempt to hash it out on air, giving him a truly harsh take on his potential within the UFC.
I worry about your commitment to fighting, and I worry about where you stand, not your commitment to training. I think you have one foot out the door.
As you would expect, this private topic was viewed by millions of people, leaving Schaub as the subject of ridicule from the masses. And while Brendan did decide to retire shortly after, all in all, this has to be viewed as yet another bad judgment call by the famed color commentator. Number 1. Chris Cyborg. Joe Rogan and Dana White were both forced to apologize publicly after a number of comments they had made about the legendary Chris Cyborg went viral. Now, Cyborg, as we all know, is quite the physical specimen, boasting the most terrifying knockout ratio in women's MMA. However, during an appearance on Rogan's popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, the host and the UFC president made remarks about Cyborg that were clearly in bad taste.
When I saw her at the MMA Awards, she looked like Vanderlei Silva in a dress and heels. And she did.
questioning her gender and making comments about her genitalia.
Where would I start? Probably
Her dick.
She's the only person that cuts weight by chopping off her dick.
Both men were forced to admit that they screwed up big time after a public outcry for an apology following the clip's broadcast. And that will just about do it for this list. If you enjoyed today's video, do be sure to leave a comment before subscribing to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. Thanks for watching.